You know, our lectionary text is one I've actually preached here at CCU before, back in 2012. And of course, you remember every word, right? Yeah, right. Okay, I almost jumped ship and chose another text, but perhaps there is still more that we can learn for our present circumstances from this very familiar story, especially as we consider it in the light of Father's Day and the season of Coronatide. So here is the text. I invite you to listen with the ears of your heart to the message that the Spirit has for each of us. Mark chapter 4. On that day, when evening had come, he said to them, "Let us go across to the other side." And leaving the crowd behind, they took him with them in the boat just as he was. Other boats were with him. A great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into the boat, so that the boat was already being swamped. But he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. And they woke him and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" He woke up and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." Then the wind ceased, and there was a dead calm. He said to them, "Why are you afraid? Have you still no faith?" And they were filled with great awe and said to one another, "Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?" Holy wisdom, holy word, thanks be to God. So, it's summertime, and at least some of you are glued to a screen. So I just want to say two things that stand out, two things to stand out to me about this incident as told in Mark's gospel. First, Jesus and our dads were not put in our boats to help us avoid the storms. And second, if Jesus and our dads are asleep in our boat, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Boom. That's it. I'm done. Let's go home. Okay, maybe I can explain a little bit of what I mean. The scene in Mark's gospel is a vivid one. At the end of a long day of teaching and preaching and healing and helping, Jesus says to his disciples, "Let's go to the other side." And so they get in a boat and they push out and they take him, did you notice, just as he was. Just as he was exhausted, tired, worn out. And so of course he's going to go sleep in the stern of the boat. And a furious squall comes up on the Sea of Galilee, and the waves begin to crash over the sides of their boat so that it is nearly swamped. Now remember, some of the disciples are experienced fishermen, right? But even they find themselves in a situation beyond their control. So where was Jesus? Asleep in the stern on a cushion. So the panicked disciples wake him and say, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" You know, sometimes when circumstances of our lives break in on us, it feels just like that to us, right? We kind of have to ask, "Where are you, God? Don't you care?" Now, maybe some of you are feeling a little bit uncomfortable with the idea of accusing God in that way or confronting Jesus even. Doesn't seem very respectful. But friends, think of it this way. The disciples knew where to cry out. They knew who to cry out to for help. Because Jesus in other places in the New Testament had already told them that it was all right to cry out to God. In fact, God invites us to seek, to knock, to pound on the door of heaven. There, in the midst of the storms of life, those are perfect opportunities to know the capacity of God to handle our questions, even our anger, our doubts, God's permission and invitation even to be brutally honest in our anguish, even if it's aimed at God. Just read the book of Psalms sometime. So when the disciples cry out to Jesus in the boat, he hears, he gets up, he responds. He says, "Peace, be still," and the sea becomes completely calm. But then comes another disturbing part of this story. He turns to the disciples with these words, "Why are you afraid? Have you no faith?" Well, my first response is, are you kidding? Storm? You know, in reading this again, I have to think that there's a reason that this incident was reported in the Gospels just the way it was reported. A reason why the writers wanted to remind the fledgling Christian community, and therefore us as well, that even if the storms we're facing seem insurmountable, it's not the whole story. So the gospel writer includes this incident to remind us that there will be times when our world is thrown into such chaos, we will wonder where God is. Anybody had that experience in the last 18 months? And even wondering, if God is there, does God care? It is in those times, perhaps most of all, when we cannot prove God's presence by what is happening around us, that we will need to be able to look back and know from past experiences, past encounters, that God is God, and that the love of God is more powerful than whatever storm we're facing. So this story, friends, is remembered and retold, not only for what it reveals about God's presence in the person of Jesus to the disciples in that moment, but for what the story could mean for future generations as it reveals God's presence in the storms of life. So we might hear ourselves say, we're not sure right now about God's presence, but we know for certain that God is God, because this story bears witness to God's presence and power in the midst of the storm. You know, there's a beautiful quote that is said to be etched into the walls of a concentration camp with these words: "I believe in the sun even when it is not shining. I believe in love even when I feel it not. I believe in God even when God is silent." Jesus brought calm to the chaos, saying, "Peace, be still." And if you think about it for a moment, much of the turmoil in our lives isn't simply the turmoil from outside experiences, things that are happening out there, but the turmoil that churns within us, right? Tearing us apart. I think I told you back in 2012 that there is a tradition called in the British Navy that if there's a sudden disaster aboard the ship, the still is blown. The still is a whistle that calls the crew to a moment of silence in crisis. So when you hear the whistle, when you hear that particular still, everyone aboard knows that it means prepare to do the wise thing. Don't you know that this moment of calm probably helped to avert many a catastrophe at sea, many an impulsive or knee-jerk reaction? Think about it. It's amazing what we can do when not giving in to panic, but hearing the words of Jesus, peace, be still. It's what mindfulness and meditation and all of these things teach us these days, that separation between incident and response. Well, I don't know about you, but it's very often that I do not practice stillness, especially in those bad situations, even though I know it would be a good idea. I most often react with a, what can we do? What should we do right now? Let's address this. What if we practice stillness? What if we took stock of the situation before acting? With the disciples, we might recognize that our situation is not as desperate as it seems. And if it is as desperate as it seems, it can still be handled better by a calm, reasoned, and peaceful approach. Here's a thought. Can we thank God that Jesus is asleep in the boat? And let that image not lead us to question whether God cares, but to know that there is a power within us waiting to be awakened. Just as the realm of God indwells Christ like a seed waiting to sprout, so this Christ indwells us, sleeps maybe within us, reminding us not only of our agency in times of challenge, but giving us a chance to recognize, and here's a big one, not only is Christ in our midst, but that God has put lots of other people in the same boat. Some of them are dads. But wait, before you leap to the unrealistic expectation for our dads or Jesus to rescue us from the storm, may I give a little grace here. I think dad roles in our world are making some much needed improvements and adjustments. I'm not talking about the human jungle gym, the instructor in the fine arts of shaving, or car washing, or outdoor grilling, or lawn mowing and other solemn rites and gender role stereotypes. Or the tougher parts, like being expected to be the stern disciplinarian, you wait till your father gets home. I'm actually loving images that I'm seeing in the media of dads washing dishes or feeding a baby. And how many moms are actually the stern disciplinarian, right? But we still have these residual expectations, and this is actually backed up by research, that at some level we are all seeking that one father figure or wise teacher or therapist or minister who will not only answer all our questions about the meaning of life, but will also yank us out of life's storms into the calm waters of peace and life without pain or confusion. As a parent, I long to protect my children in that way. But what an impossible standard for our parents, our dads, our leaders. And I want to say Jesus rebuked the disciples for that very attitude, which at its very essence is a lack of faith. Faith in Christ's presence to see them through the storm, and faith in ourselves to be agents of that peace to each other in the midst of the storm. Now, because my dad is here today, I want to end with a story that I actually learned from him. A story that he learned from my grandfather. And this is a story describing an incident when my grandfather was a Navy chaplain in Micronesia immediately following World War II. You see, there was a new convert to Christianity whose name was Daniel. He was a Marshallese man. And it seems that word was received that a tsunami or a tidal wave was headed for those tiny atolls, the highest point of which was about 5 feet above sea level. So would this be cause for some concern? Oh, you know it. So what did they do? Their immediate reaction or action was to put as many people on every Navy ship or boat and put them out to sea for safety. And there was widespread terror and panic, especially among the folks who knew of the potential destruction of such a phenomenon. The wave was supposed to hit sometime in the middle of the night, and Daniel was one of the many who were left behind when the last ship put out to sea. Well, that night, the tidal wave came and went. Nothing more than a little extra high tide. Why? There was no continental shelf to build up the destructive force. Well, the next day, my grandfather talked to Daniel and asked him how he'd spent the night. And Daniel said, "I slept." "But how were you able to sleep?" asked my grandfather. And Daniel said, "Many people were afraid, some even crying, but not me. I go to my bed, read my Bible, put on my swimming clothes, and go to sleep." What an example of a truly waterproof faith. Daniel was not in denial. He did not expect God to pluck him out of the path of the wave. He put on his bathing suit and was ready to swim, but he did trust that God would be with him, excuse the expression, come hell or high water. Now, please indulge me again because my dad is here, and hey, if you want to talk about your dad, you preach next time, all right? The anthem we're about to hear today is one of his favorites, and it is sung in this video by me and 3 of my closest harmonizers. It begins with these words: "My God shall supply my wants and my needs. Beside the still waters, God faithfully leads." When Jesus responded to his disciples' cry, he didn't tell them to have no fear. Anyone not feeling some anxiety right now probably isn't paying enough attention to what's going on in our world. Jesus says not, "Don't be afraid." He invites them and us to examine why we're afraid. In essence, to consider why we have let the windstorm rule our reality. When faith, like a still small voice, reminds us of our blessings and God's faithfulness, even or especially in the storm. Amen.